and have a donut. Well, welcome. This morning, my name is Todd Pope. I'm the lead pastor here, and if we have not met yet, I'd love the opportunity to do that. And I would like to ask you where you've been. So, no, you should be here. So, let's pray this morning. Father, we just thank you so much for your goodness. We thank you for your grace. God, we ask that you would speak to our hearts today. Lord, through maybe a challenging message for some, and I just pray that you would challenge us, that we would take steps of faith, that we would take steps that might even seem hard, that we would take them in pursuit of you. And we give you praise in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Every year we choose a theme for the year, and so this year our theme has been multiply. We'll reveal our theme for 2019 next Sunday. But the last Sunday of the year, we do a message, I call it a remix, right? Multiply remix, where we have one more message on that theme. And so that's what we're going to do today. We have believed that God would and wanted to multiply his presence in our lives individually as well as corporately, to multiply his fruit in us. We also believe God was going to literally multiply our church through adding a new campus in Oconomowoc, which was delayed a little bit and now will happen in just a few weeks. Our theme verse as Bridge Church for 2018 has been Deuteronomy 30, verse 16, which says, "For I command you this day to love the Lord your God and to keep his commands, decrees, and regulations by walking in his ways. If you do this, you will live and multiply. And the Lord your God will bless you and the land you're about to enter and occupy." So in this theme, thinking about that verse, how could that verse apply to you today? What is the land in front of you? Right? What is that obstacle in front of you? What is that thing in front of you that God might want to do in your life this year? What is that? What is the land in front of you? We have believed that God wanted to multiply fruit in our lives and our family. And in this last message of this theme, before we introduce next year's theme next week, I want to look at what is the key to multiplying, what's the key to multiplication in your life. And then I want to look at something that we are going to do together that has proven effective at multiplying power in our lives. So first, let's look at the key to multiplication in our lives. The key is the multiplier. Right, is the multiplier. According to dictionary.com, multiplier means a number by which another is multiplied. All right, this isn't a difficult math lesson this morning. A number by which another is multiplied. So that number has tremendous impact on the final sum. Right, if you have 0 as your multiplier, right, it lessens that sum. Right, it reduces whatever the number is on the left, it reduces it down to what? 0, right? But if that multiplier is 10, right, it's a tremendous number. But if it's 100, it's even bigger. So that number, the multiplier, is powerful. I like one of the other definitions of multiplier. It says a person or thing that multiplies. Again, the dictionary, at least dictionary.com, not that hard, all right? Those are some great definitions, but pretty simple. So the greater the potential of the multiplier, the greater the multiplier effect. For instance, if you place a basketball in my hands, it's just a basketball in the hands of a decent shooter. But you put that same basketball in the hands of LeBron James, and now you have 4 MVP awards, deserving way more than that, by the way. 3 NBA championships, 3 NBA Finals MVP awards, 2 Olympic gold medals, 14 All-Star appearances. If you place a golf club in my hands, it is just a golf club and sometimes a weapon. But that you place that same club in the hands of Tiger Woods and you have 80 PGA tournament victories, including 14 majors. If you put a paintbrush in my hands, it will result in artwork that looks chaotic, childlike, and unrefined. Stick figures come to mind. But you put that same paintbrush in the hands of Leonardo da Vinci, when he was alive at least, not now, and it can produce a masterpiece like his Salvator Mundi, which sold at auction last November for $450.3 million. How is it that the same things can bring about such dramatically different results? Well, it depends on who's holding them, and it depends how they're being used. That person with that skill becomes the multiplier. So, do you know who the ultimate multiplier is? That's, again, not a hard question in church. All right, it's pretty much the Sunday school answer this morning, God or Jesus, right? He's the ultimate multiplier. When he's added to the equation, the limited becomes limitless, right? He is the ultimate multiplier. Here's our bottom line today. God makes our potential exponential. God makes our potential exponential when he's added to the equation. And it leads me to my text, and we're going to read it in smaller bits and pieces today so I can talk about each section. We're going to be reading the first 13 verses of John chapter 6, but let me start with the first 6 verses. After this, Jesus crossed over to the far side of the Sea of Galilee, also known as the Sea of Tiberias. A huge crowd kept following him wherever he went, because they saw his miraculous signs as he healed the sick. Then Jesus climbed a hill and sat down with his disciples around him. It was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration. Jesus soon saw a huge crowd of people coming to look for him. Turning to Philip, he asked, "Where can we buy bread to feed all these people?" He was testing Philip, for he already knew what he was going to do. So when you're wanting to see your life multiplied or your effectiveness multiplied, there's 3 things. The first thing is, do not focus on your limited ability. Don't focus on your own abilities. I'm convinced that one of the reasons that we don't see greater miracles in our lives is because we spend too much time focusing on our inabilities rather than on his abilities. That's not hard, okay? We focus too much on our inabilities rather than on his abilities. And there's going to be times in our lives and in our church when God's calling us to something that is bigger than ourselves, bigger than our abilities, bigger than what we know we can do, and sometimes it's something that seems impossible. In this case, in John chapter 6, Jesus turns to Philip and says, "Where can we buy bread? Where can we buy bread to feed all these people?" And we know because verse 6 says so, it was a test. It was a test of faith. As long as Philip was going to think in the natural, it was an impossible task. It wasn't something that he could do. There was no way Philip was going to pull it off. None. And yet Jesus was asking him to do it. Where can we find the bread? So what is he asking you to do today? What impossible task is he calling us to do? And I think this is where faith comes in. This is where trust comes in. Verse 7, Philip replied, even if we worked for months, we wouldn't have enough money to feed them. Philip missed the entire point. He was trying to solve the problem on his own. He looked out over the crowd and he's like, okay, I know there's about 85 to 100 people there, and there's 200 over there, and he's like quick doing the math. And he's like, I know these are our resources, and I think this is the most amusing part of the story, is he does all that and figures out the resources, and he looks at Jesus and says, Jesus, Son of God, Jesus, creator of all that we see right now, it can't be done. Now, if you don't see the humor in that, then you don't really know who Jesus is, because there's humor there when he goes, it can't be done. And don't we do the same thing sometimes? God calls us to do something, and we immediately start coming up with reasons we can't, or we come up with reasons why it can't be done. You know, I've seen people that God called into the ministry, and because they can't figure out how that's supposed to work, ultimately they say, no. Like, I couldn't do that, God, because I would have to give up my job, or I would have to do this, or I'd have to do that. And because they can't figure it out between their ears, they just simply say no. And what they're saying is, God, you messed up. you don't know what you're doing in calling me. This can't be done. God makes our potential exponential. And I think what Jesus wanted Philip to say was, I can't do this, but you can. Like, I've seen all the miracles that you've done to this point. Like, I know you can do it. So God, if you want it done, do it. And I think that's really what he wanted to. When he calls us to do something that we know we can't do, I think he wants us to do the same thing. He wants us to turn to him and say, like, we can't do it, but you can, right? We can't purchase a $35,000 car in 1 year for a missionary going to India. Like, we can't do that. We've got a lot of other expenses going out. We got a lot of other things that we need to spend money on. But God says, you can do that as long as he's helping, as long as he's behind it. We could say we can't purchase all the equipment necessary to launch a new campus without borrowing for it. But with you, we can. And we did. This was a big step of faith that many of you probably don't even know about. But earlier this year, the board and I, we made a decision to tithe as a church to missions. So we take 10% of our general fund, and it goes into Kingdom Builders, right off the top. Now, in a year that we have a lot of extra expenses, that was a big step of faith. Now, we were already giving to missions, but not quite to that level. And so we were like, we really want to set an example for people to say, you know what, we're going to trust in the midst of a season that doesn't make sense. We're in the midst of that. We're going to take a step of faith, and we're going to start tithing off the general fund. And God has blessed the giving, I think, to meet that. He's blessed the church. We're 100 larger than we were at this point last year. It's an amazing thing that God has been doing. And we could say, we can't. But I think he wants us instead to turn to him and say, we can't do it, but through you we can. So we take a step of faith. When you call us to something and say, it may not make sense mathematically, but it makes sense theologically. And if I want to make sense of my walk with God, it's much more important that it makes sense theologically than it is that it makes sense mathematically. God makes our potential exponential. So don't focus on your limited ability, focus on his unlimited ability and your availability. Verses 8 and 9. Then Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. There's a young boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good is that with this huge crowd? So the second thing we learn here is don't limit God by doubting his abilities. You know, when you hear this part of the story, or at least when I hear this part of the story and I hear Andrew saying these words, for the first 2/3 of the statement, I'm like, yes, good job, Andrew. You know, you had this, like, okay, how are we going to do it? Here's a little boy. He's got 5 loaves and 2 fish. It's no good in my hands, but I'm bringing him to Jesus. Pretty sure he can do something with him. And so you just want to encourage Andrew, like, yes, you're on the right track, Andrew. Keep it going, Andrew. We want him to say, there's this boy here. He's 5 loaves and 2 fish. I know you can do it, Jesus. Will you multiply them and feed the crowd? That's what we want Andrew to say, because Andrew had been with Jesus from the start. Think about some of the things to this point in Christ's ministry, what Andrew had seen. He had seen Jesus heal the man who had been crippled for 38 years. He saw Jesus heal a man with leprosy. He saw Jesus, he experienced this personally when Jesus calmed the storm with 3 words, peace be still. Right? A tumultuous storm out in the middle of the sea, and Jesus just said, shh, be quiet. And it listened. He saw Jesus heal the blind and the paralyzed and many more miracles. Andrew knew what Jesus was capable of. He knew that God makes our potential exponential. But then Andrew says this little 3-letter word that puts the brakes on his faith and his trust. Here's a little boy, 5 loaves, 2 fish, but what is that for so many? Here's the bread and the fish, but have you ever done that? I would tithe, God, but I would serve God, but. I would love to go on a missions trip, God, but. I'd like to tell my friend about what Jesus has done in my life, but. I'd like to invite my neighbor to church, but. I would do that, God, but. See, Andrew's faith in God was too small. In essence, what Andrew was really saying was, we've got these 5 loaves and 2 fish, but not even you, Jesus, can do anything with something so small. But is a ministry killer. But can keep us from being faithful to God's calling. That little word can keep us from doing the impossible through God. And but keeps us from remembering that God makes our potential exponential. I think sometimes we just have a remembering problem. Have you ever had a remembering problem? Like literally, I have a remembering problem. Like, as I've gotten a little closer to, I want to say the end, but that sounds so morbid, but to the middle, as I get closer to the middle, I've discovered that I've got to write things down. I have people that come up to me on Sunday mornings and they tell me something that's going on in their life or something they want me to do or to pray for or whatever, and I have a response to that. And the response is email me or text me because I am not responsible until you do that. Because I will forget. Like, I don't just say I might forget, I will forget. I declare that before you. I'll forget. And so I've got to write it down, and I don't have stuff to write it down with, so you have to text me or email me, and then I will remember. But I think we have a remembering problem. We forget just how faithful God has been in our past, and so I think it's important that we do things to write that down. In 2019, make an effort to write down and remember his faithfulness. One of the things that I started probably 15 years ago, actually in some ways started 27 years ago, is started journaling. Now, I've been faithful and consistent with that for probably 15 years, but I started journaling when we first got married. And I can tell you this, I go through those, not regularly, but on occasion I've gone back a few years and I've read some of the things that I journaled back in the day, and it is an encouragement to me. One, that I've grown in lots of ways, but two, to see some of the things that God has done since then. You know, and how small my faith was or small my trust was in areas, and now on this side of my journey, I go, wow, like what God has done. You know, and so sometimes we just have a remembering problem. So begin to journal. I promise that'll be a powerful thing. But if you and I are not seeing miracles happen, let me make one more promise to you. God is not the problem. His ability, not the problem. He has all ability. He has all power. He can do it. God is always at work around us. Sometimes it's a vision problem. We just don't see the miracles that God is doing around us all the time. And maybe he's calling us to do the impossible, but we limit God. We limit his ability to do miracles through us because we answer his challenges and his callings with but. Like, that's a great idea, God, but. And if we want to see God do amazing things in our church and in our lives, then we need to answer his callings with, we can't do it, God. Will you do it through us? Will you do it through us? We must remember that God makes our potential exponential. Verses 10 through 13. Jesus says, tell everyone to sit down. So they all sat down on the grassy slopes. The men alone numbered about 5,000. Scholars tell us there was probably between 20 and 27,000 people in total there, 5,000 of which were men. Then Jesus took the loaves, he gave thanks to God, he distributed them to the people. Afterward, he did the same with the fish, and they all ate as much as they wanted. Fish and bread buffet. Sounds pretty good to me. After everyone was full, Jesus told his disciples, now gather the leftovers so that nothing is wasted. So they picked up the pieces and filled 12 baskets with scraps left by the people who had eaten from the 5 barley loaves. So here's the last point. Trust God to use what you give. Jesus wasn't asking Philip and Andrew to feed the people, right? He knew they didn't have the resources. He knew they didn't have a food truck out back or multiple ones in the front or a food chariot. He knew they didn't have the resources available. He knew they didn't have the ability. He knew this was impossible for them. But what Jesus wanted was for Philip and Andrew to come to him with what they had and say, this is it. Like, this is all we have. We know it's not enough. We know we're not enough, but we know that you can take what we have to offer and you can multiply that and you can do a miracle through us. That's the faith that he wanted Philip and Andrew to have. He wanted them to remember that Jesus is our great multiplier. But notice that Jesus wanted them to participate in the miracle. Don't you understand that Jesus could have just went like, all right, ta-da, and everybody has a Happy Meal show up on their lap? Like, that'd be amazing, and everybody would be like, wow, this is cool. But he didn't want that. He wanted them to participate. So one, he wanted them to go, we can't do it. Like, this isn't something we can do. And he wanted them to go, okay, here's a little boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish. It's not much. This is all we could come up with. Will you take that and bless that, God? Here's what we have. We don't have much. We don't have enough. Here's what we have. And Jesus wants us to participate. See, the cool part is, no matter how great the multiplier is, if the disciples would just said, we got nothing. If you multiply infinite times 0, you get 0. No matter how great the multiplier is, if you don't bring something to him to do something with, you get 0. But when you bring yourself at least and give him yourself, and this little boy only had a little bit, although 5 loaves seems like a lot for a little boy to eat. I'm just saying, these big loaves of bread, I don't know. He's a big bread eater, this little kid. But he brought 5 loaves and 2 fish, and it was something, and when you multiply something times infinite, that's a really big number. But we have to bring him something to work with. God makes our potential exponential. So what is he asking you to do that's impossible without him? Man, there ought to be something in our life that we go, if God's not in it, it won't work. There ought to be something. See, that's what something in our life that we go, we're trusting God, we're trusting you with this. And if you don't bless it, it's not going to work. Will you trust him? What is God asking us as a church to do that's impossible without him? He's asking us to launch a campus. We're taking major steps of faith to do just that in February. However, I believe that God is asking us to do something else prior to that. And so starting next Sunday is our annual 21-day fast. 21 days of denial is what we call it now. And some will participate in that. If you're not familiar with what fasting is, there's guides out in the foyer that explain that in way greater detail than I'm going to give you this morning. But it's basically you're sacrificing something, you're abstaining from something in order to create more time to spend with God and more focus to spend with God. So some will participate during that 21 days by drinking only liquids, and they won't have food. There will be people that will participate in that way. Maybe for just certain days, maybe for all of those days. But some will do it that way. Some will participate by doing a Daniel fast, which is basically vegetables, some fruits, and nuts. There's no bread, no meat, no dairy, all that kind of stuff. Some will participate that way. Others will fast certain food items. They'll give up sugar, or they'll give up coffee, or they'll give up whatever. And they've dedicated or named certain food items that they'll give up, or certain activities that they will give up, social media or other things. But here's the question that matters when determining not only if, but how you will participate. And here's the question: what will stretch you? If it's easy, if you give up nothing, then you give him nothing to multiply. No matter how great he is, if you give him nothing, you're not going to get a whole lot out of it. Like when you're doing a fast and you're like, well, I know I can do the Daniel fast. I know what recipes. Like for me, if I was doing a Daniel fast, it's too easy for me because we know what we can eat. We know what we like. I could eat that for 21 days. It would do nothing for me because it wouldn't be a sacrifice for me. Does that make sense? So you got to do something that will stretch you. Do something that you don't go, oh, this is going to be easy. Challenge yourself. If you sacrifice little, guess what you're going to get? Little, right? There's somebody that said, I don't remember who it was, that says, with little faith, little prayer. No, I'm going to mess this up, and I have it written down over here, so I don't want to mess that up. Little prayer, little power. Some prayer, some power. Much prayer, much power. And I think you could add to that, with fasting prayer comes fasting power. I mean, there's a whole nother level. But what will stretch you? If you want something you've never had, I think you need to try something you've never done. Take it up another level. The idea behind the 21 days of denial is to make life simpler and less distracting to allow more time with God. There have been times in the past when people got so focused on the food and what they could or couldn't have and all that they actually made it more, not less distracting, they made it more distracting. The point of the whole thing is make it simpler, make it easier, it's so that you're spending less time preparing food. Does that make sense? So that you can spend more time with God. So no matter what you choose up, this is what we're doing. And this is Pastor Phil's bottom line today with the kids, and I love it, so I stole it. Is this: tell your body no so your spirit can grow. Tell your body no so your spirit can grow. I say yes to my body daily. How about you? I'm hungry. Okay, I'll feed you. I'm tired. Okay, I'll sleep. Right? We say it all day. Yes. Our body just says, yes, we want this. I want a cookie. Your body, if your body is anything like my body is like a spoiled toddler, right? I want a cookie now. Okay. Mine usually talks more pie than cookie, but I've had plenty of both. And so I've said yes to my body a lot in December, and it shows. And so I need to learn again to tell my body no. And so that's what December or January is all about. We need to tell our body no. Here's what I know. Fasting is a multiplier in God's kingdom. There are things that will happen, Jesus said, only by prayer and fasting. There are things Jesus said, like this only happens by prayer and fasting. He's saying you can pray all day long about that thing, but that thing won't change just by prayer. That there is a booster type of prayer that thing requires. So if you've been addicted to something for years and years and years, and you're like, but I've prayed about it. I've prayed about that so much. I've talked to God about that so much. I've given it over to God so much. I'm still addicted. That thing only gets broken by prayer and fasting. Have you fasted about it? Have you boosted your prayer life in that area and fasted about it? Fasting's a type of prayer booster, not because it earns us extra points with God at all, but what I think it does, at least in my life, it puts my spirit in a better position to hear. It puts my spiritual receiver in a better location. I wonder what God will do in your life and in my life in 2019 if we start the year by denying ourselves and pursuing Him. This isn't a diet. Will it have impact on your weight? It will on mine. You will see my face thin out, It will have an impact, and that's wonderful, but that doesn't last, right? That part, it's like a placebo effect. That part won't last. But when you think about, what could God do in my life this year if I start my year this way, I promise you it'll be worth it. Tell your body no so your spirit can grow. This year has the potential to be the greatest year that Bridge Church and that you personally have ever had. I believe that. We're taking the largest step of faith that we've ever taken as a church, in my time here at least. And as such, I want to challenge you to take your fasting. If you've participated, if you've been around, we've done this now for I think this is our 7th year of doing this. Maybe you've done this before. I want to challenge you to do something that you've never done before. Maybe you fasted social media in the past, like that was your fast, and that's legit. But try adding some specific categories of food to it. Maybe this year you're going to give up coffee and social media. Or you're going to give up sugar and coffee and social media, coffee media, whatever. But take it up a level. Maybe you fasted certain categories of food before. I'm going to give up sugar, or I'm going to give up coffee, and you've done that. Well, perhaps you want to add some days or a week of the full Daniel fast. And like this year, I'm going, at least for 1 week of this, I'm going to do the whole thing of the Daniel fast. Maybe you've done the Daniel fast in the past, and you're like, this year, I'm going to do water only or liquid only 1 or 2 days a week. So I'm going to do the Daniel fast, but at least a day or two a week, I'm going to add this whole other level of fasting. Or maybe you've done the whole fast before. Maybe you want to go more days. God makes our potential exponential. I think fasting in this way, personally, I've chosen, I'm going more days this year personally than I ever have in my life. I've never done this many days. And I'm doing that because I want something in 2019 that I've never had before. I want to experience something in 2019 that I never have before. And fasting in this way helps me to remember that the power resides in Him, not me. Like, I can't do it without your help, God. God makes our potential exponential. So what will you give up for a time in order to see God multiply in your life? What would you say, what? If I give this thing up for a time, if I give up video games, young person, if I give them up for 21 days, and instead of being in the room or being in the basement or the game room, whatever, and spending hours and hours and hours playing that game, what if instead of that, I'm pursuing and seeking God? What if instead of that, we're spending time together as a family, playing board games or spending time with you? You understand the difference that it could make in your life if for a time, if for a season, you say, it's not that, but this, right? Familiar with that book, don't eat this, eat that. Like, don't do that, do this, all right? Don't focus on that, focus on this. So in the foyer, there are fasting guides that just help you. Like, if you've never done this, you're not familiar, it'll help you. It's a guide that'll just direct you through that. It includes information about the Daniel fast if you want to do that portion. Our new SOAP reading guides, our Bible reading plans are out there. Those start on January 1. Both of those also can be found on our website. But what I have up at the front is I have these little commitment cards, and they're for you to write down what you will give up. Like, this is what I will give up. For our 2019 21 Days of Denial, I will deny myself, and then there's a line. There's not a line for your name. This is confidential. But then it's perforated, right? Like magic. And so on this one is, you write the same thing. What is it that you're going to deny yourself for 21 days? And this piece you can leave on the table. You can take the whole thing home with you. Maybe you don't know what you're going to do yet. Pray about it. Because I want to see God move in my life in ways that I have never experienced before, I'm going to do something I've never done before. And it says, I will tell my body no so my spirit can grow. And so you take this, you write down what you're doing. Something happens when you write it down, when you post it on your refrigerator, or you post it on your car dash, you put it somewhere that it reminds you, oh yeah, I'm denying myself. I'm saying no to my body. I'm saying no to the things that my body wants so that I can say yes to God. I'm saying no to the things that my flesh wants to do so that my spirit can grow. I want my spirit to grow at the beginning of 2019. And so we want to encourage you to pick one of those up and do that. So try something harder than you've ever done before. So as we sing this song, I want to invite you to come and get a card. You don't have to. No one's making you do this. We're not going to watch the video footage later to see who didn't move from their chair, all right? Maybe we will, but we probably won't do that. But I do want you to feel that freedom to move. Our prayer team will be up here. If you have any prayer need, they'd love to pray with you. But let's do this as we sing this song today.